Hi, I am Dr. Shantella Sherman. I am a historian based in Washington, D.C., in America. And my field of study, my specialty is the American eugenics movement. I originally started my research in eugenics just to kind of understand a little bit more about intraracial, um, discord, prejudice, discrimination, because I grew up in Washington, D.C., where it was called the Chocolate City. So we didn't face discrimination in the same ways that most people did, where it was white over black. A lot of times we had black officials. So we've had black mayors, black police chiefs. All of my teachers up through high school were all black people. And so they always had things. There was never a racial schism in a way that most Americans face things, but we still had prejudice and discrimination. So I wanted to understand better the intraracial and colorism discrimination that most people faced in Washington, D.C., that was tantamount and sometimes um, as bad as what most people would consider to be race hatred between white and black or white over black. So, in coming up with the science of it, um, someone spoke to me one day when I was in Nebraska, where I was working on my PhD, and they referred to me as a pure black. And I never heard that concept before, but it kept coming up. And I realized that I was in a space where there were very few um, black people who were dark skinned or were brown. Most of them were mixed race because the state was predominantly white. And I would say at the time that I was there in 2006, the percentage of black people in that space was roughly 2.3% of the entire population of the state. So it was not uncommon to have people walk up to me and ask if they could touch my skin, to touch my hair, or to determine by rubbing my hands if I had paint on me. And I realized that a lot of these people, very good natured, well meaning people, had simply never seen a black person in person. What they relied on were things that they saw on television. And I wanted to understand that better as well. So the concept of a pure black as opposed to a mixed race person, or what they termed hybrid, which is a very derogatory term, but they didn't necessarily realize that at the time. But the concept of a hybrid is a scientific term. And that's when I started to understand that there was a science behind the race issues that we were looking at, and there was a race science, and that race science was eugenics. And so, just for balance, eugenics is the science of better breeding, where the belief is in the same way that we can create better plants and animals by cross pollinating to take out certain characteristics and to add in, that the same thing could be done with humans. And so America began attempting to um, create better people, quote unquote, as early as the 1830s. And in that process, they actually started to try and crossbreed different types of enslaved people so that they would have the best possible workers for plantations and for enslaved labor. And so just understanding that once we come out of enslavement, you have to try and understand what you do with a group of people who are taller, stronger, mightier physically than the people who had once enslaved them. And now that they're free to go around the streets, you have to come up with a science based on, or laws based on science that restrict their mobility. And so I started to understand how eugenics was worked into most American laws, like the Dred Scott case in 1854, or the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which led to our separate but equal laws, which we maintained legally up until the 1960s. And it goes into our voting rights, our housing policies, our school policies. And so once again, you start to see where everything kind of crosses into the next level of human life. So eugenics, I always say, instead of it being the top down or the bottom up, eugenics is like a sprinkler system. So every person in the nation, every person who is alive at some point experiences eugenic thoughts, hereditarian thoughts, the belief that certain characteristics are passed down from one generation to the next. And it's not just hair color or eye color or hair texture, things like that. but it's characteristics such as poverty or intelligence, IQ, criminality. If you had a parent or great grandparent who used to tell lies, they would say that there's a gene in your body for lying. And we know that these things are not true, but it's part of the fabric of America. It's part of the fabric of the world, quite frankly, where we basically just assume that if a person lives in a particular neighborhood or they've had a parent or grandparent who has particular habits, that it's passed down and that these are bad people. And so it is imperative in most of what we do in our daily lives that we understand the science behind the rhetoric and everything else. So much of the research that I'm working on currently, there are two different things that I'm working on. One is a book called Popular Eugenics in Television and Film, Volume 2, where we're looking at popular thought about eugenic and hereditary thinking that finds its way into the scripts and into the podcast. It finds its way into streaming or music that we're ingesting on a daily basis. And the goal is to make people aware that they're ingesting these images and these messages in the same way that they do food. And sometimes the things that you're watching actually make you ill. They make you feel a certain way. They depress you. They make you feel that you need to change or fix things about yourself, which you absolutely do not. But the goal is to make people aware so that if you're forewarned, you're forearmed, and you can actually talk to directors and producers right in and tell them that you would like these things changed, and they will do that. The second project that we're working on is looking at sterilization practices. Part of eugenic thought is that positive eugenics is you want people who have good genes to breed as much as possible. Those who have bad genes, quote unquote, you want to restrict their breeding. And you do that through, unfortunately, sterilizations. And a lot of people in America have been sterilized without their knowledge or permission. We've had cases in California as late as December 2023, where women, Black women and Latino women that are in California state penitentiaries were sterilized without their knowledge or permission. They were simply told that they had abnormal cells with pap smears. And once they went into the physician's offices, they were unceremoniously sterilized and given full hysterectomies. I'm looking at research that shows how the legal system and our carceral states continue these eugenic sterilizations based on the fact that they believe these women are breeding criminals. If a woman is already in prison and she's a quote unquote criminal, it means that she will breed children. She will have children who are also criminals. So the thought within California state penitentiaries and across the country is basically if you sterilize these women while they're in prison, it one cuts the taxpayers' fees that they'll have to pay for the kids that she already has, and at the same time, it keeps her from producing other children who will potentially be criminals. And so the work is hard, it's difficult, but it is necessary. For those of you who are engaged in research at this point, I would tell you to stay the course. It is not easy work, but it is so necessary. It is so important because these are voices that have been erased. And while we're talking about issues of sterilization in 2023, 2024, these policies were instituted in 1920 and in 1924. So we've had 100 years of this. And those voices of those women and men who were sterilized years ago have not been heard. So we're going through their records, and I encourage those of you who are engaged in research such as this. It may be difficult, but we are a global community of scholars, and we always want you to reach out to us at Acumen. And also, to me personally, I'm always open to talking to students and helping them through the difficult parts of the research. I've tried, I've had to decompress. I've had to have a weekly masseuse appointment where I can literally get the toxins I feel like I've ingested in going through the personal medical records of the physicians, the administrators, and the surgeons who perform these sterilizations on young people as young as 8, 9, 10 years old. And it just mentally did its toll. It worked its toll on me. But again, if I don't do the work, it won't be done. And I encourage you again, stay the course, do the work. In the end, you are literally, it's like reviving. It's like the story of dry bones. In spiritual context, it's like raising dry bones. It's like giving ancestors their voices back, and so it is including it is it's incredibly important that we do this work because otherwise it simply won't be done. Thank you. Okay.